being the good divine physicists that we are, we have a need to complete this equation, this formula that's been brought forth, and to remember that it started out with Satchitananda, or existence, knowledge and bliss, with a plus sign and a question mark and an equals and a question mark. Well, we know that most physicists and scientists, they like to work in symbols. But as divine scientists and physicists, we need to work in absolutes. So in looking at what Satchitananda is, which we know is a state of existence, knowledge and bliss, and we look for the absolute of what this state is, we could perhaps call it unified consciousness, when all dimensions and all levels of life come together, body, mind and spirit, and so forth. So this is our first absolute, a unified consciousness. But with that plus sign, and endeavoring to find out what arises out of that state of unified consciousness, there are many things that have been mooted. A state of receptivity, fearlessness, and so forth. But if we look at the absolute behind these, could it be that it is no mind or selflessness? Because in that state of Satchitananda, self is obliterated. So we start out with this unified consciousness, plus no mind. But what does it equal? What arises out of these? And so we have this story that perhaps will allow us to complete this equation. And it's a story about an ordinary man. And he lived at the base of a mountain, just where the road diverged. One led up the mountain and the other led off into the desert. But he could often be found sitting outside his simple little hut, smoking his pipe and drinking mint tea. And very often he'd invite travelers to join him. And they'd stop by, and he would invite them to share a cup of mint tea with him, and he'd listen. And they found him quite amiable, and you know in those circumstances what happens to those who sit and feel quite comfortable and safe. And so oftentimes they would ask him advice, and he would give it. One time he told a man to go out and study wild animals. And he told another man to go and learn the ways of plants, to plant a garden. And then he told another man to go and learn how to build a raft. And as is the way with such things, according to the divine laws, a number of these travelers found themselves journeying in a caravanserai, as they were called. And sitting around the campfire at night, they shared stories. And one man shared the story about how when he was traveling, he was able to save the people he was traveling with from a band of brigands by teaching the leader of the robbers how to cultivate a garden. And then he was able to save, another one was able to save a number of people when they were crossing a dangerous river by having the means to be able to make a raft. And so on. So all of these people found that there was just this one man who had given them this advice. They said, "I took the advice of a certain man." Well, as it so happened, when they came to the end of their journey, they found that the guide who had travelled with them all their way was none other than the man who they'd met at the base of the mountain and shared a cup of tea with. And they were greatly surprised, very greatly surprised. And he made the remark to them, "You know, you would not have come thus far had you not taken my advice, unlike many who listened to that advice and did not heed it, chose to go down their own way, take their own path." And all of these travelers, who were seekers after enlightenment, of course, they were perplexed, and they asked him, "Well, why did you not tell us this before, when we started our journey?" But you know, they didn't really need to ask him, because they recognized that this man was truth. In whatever way they'd experienced it, that this man was truth. But still the question remained, why did we need to travel this path, make this journey? Why didn't you tell us? And now this recognized wise man said, "You would not have arrived at this place had you not fulfilled three things. The first is listening to advice and heeding it. Second is implementing that advice in the experiences of life. And the third was to come to an understanding of fundamental truth, or the nature of truth." He said, "All those who seek enlightenment must follow this path, the seeking and heeding of advice, the implementing of that knowledge in life, and the understanding of the nature of truth." So in completing our equation now, what could be it is that follows that equals sign? Unified consciousness plus selflessness or no mind equals. What is it that we find now that arises out of this state? According to this story, what is it that comes when the movement of life meets the stillness of no self, selflessness, no mind? What arises out of this? Could it be truth? Truth? How does this resonate with you? Knowing from your experience now. We can say one thing to one person and another to another, which is diametrically opposite. So truth is not absolute, is it? But for the sake of equations, and this is a scientific equation, when we put the three together it makes absolute sense, doesn't it? Because what comes out of our mouth, what arises out of our being from that state in any particular encounter is irrefutable. We die for it. Isn't it so? It's an absolute. In that moment, it's an absolute. Like Jesus on the road saying God is real, and the next minute saying God doesn't exist, according to the person who's being addressed, but willing to die for it like the monk. Isn't it so? So we've completed our equation in that sense, isn't it? Using what we can consider to be absolutes, but without holding on to them. We cannot. Because our mind cannot grasp even unified consciousness as an absolute. So, but we do know what arises out of that state. In that state there is no self. No self. We can give it a description. There's presence, there's attention, there's fearlessness. But the absolute of it is that no self in the state of Satchitananda equals that which arises out of that meeting of life and that truth, the nature of truth. Not a truth, the truth. Isn't it so? I'm repeating myself, thank you.